Hello, Game Methuselah. Well, I've been trying to do quite a few videos here, and I've been having some problems with the heat, and I injured my back, and this is all neither here nor there. But with the extreme mental meltdown I'm getting from the humidity and heat here in Southern California, I thought the only video I could likely do is one that people have been asking me about, was character generation. And I thought this was interesting because, to me, character generation is a real personal thing. Back in the 70s when Dungeons & Dragons started, most people would build a stable of characters, and they would have a wizard, and a fighter, and a cleric, and a rogue, and later a monk, and, hopefully if they could roll well or cheat, a paladin. And it was not uncommon to have all kinds of different characters, much different than I kind of think it is now. The only place I find that very similar is for those of you who play Adventure League, and I'll try to tie the two in. Back in the 70s, it was not uncommon for us to play 4 or 5 times or more a week. Friday night we would get together to game, we'd play. If the game got over before 11 o'clock, we'd all look at each other and say, hey, let's run to Man's Chinese and see Star Wars on the big screen and all that. And it was $5, so, we had to kind of count our money and put it all together. But fortunately, some of us had some nice jobs while we were going to college, and some of us even had their government subsidy. So we'd always do this. Or, if the game ran late, we'd all run over to Denny's and have a Denny's Deluxe or a Superbird, because, wow, at 2 in the morning, that's about the best food you're going to find anywhere. Dawn would draw art, we'd discuss gaming on into the night, and then we'd all go back to Kettler Castle and crash out on the floor. It was a great friend of ours. All the Kettlers were all sort of adopted brothers, and we would stay there and game, and the next morning, Dawn and I would get up, and we'd start painting miniatures for the new session of the day, and then sometime later, Mrs. Kettler would get up and start cooking breakfast. And there'd be 14 kids that spent the night there. All the various sons and their friends, and they're all getting here for 1 or 2 games or go race and work on their cars. And that's the way it was. And for some reason, I never could figure out, no matter how many people were there, she always had enough food. It was very, very strange. The games evolved and changed, and, into the 80s, I played a lot of different games. But the strange thing about it was always character generation. Now, so many people kept asking me how I look at character generation and how I generate characters and the like. And I'm sort of a min-maxer, but as I have evolved and gotten substantially older, I try to run things that I think are more DM-friendly. Games that I can still really enjoy the characters and have a great time with them, but they're not going to necessarily break the game. Now, I say that to you, many of the game masters who've run against me might say I'm lying, because I still tend to run pretty aggressive characters. But I want to go ahead and talk about it since people had asked. So, I'm going to start out with 5th edition, and then maybe work backwards, or at least work into the games that I tend to play. If you're playing 5th edition and you don't have a group, you really should go play Adventure League. It's a great way to get into the game. It's free, so if your economy is poor, they give lots of little giveaways. There's often lots of old beardies like me who have a lot of the plastic miniatures, and if you don't have a figure, it's like, well, I've got one for you, or even maybe if you're going to be playing regular, I might even give one to you. But the thing I usually do is I try not to upstage everybody in Adventure League. I've been the star of many a game campaign, and I don't like to do that. So what I tend to do as my first character out of the storm is I run a life domain cleric. This one is the one I started running right off the bat. Gallic, he's really good. Heavy armor. Clerics are good because they can kind of work as a secondary fighter. They have healing, which everybody needs. And if someone else brings a healer, the great thing about Adventure League is you can always generate another character and run a more interesting character if there's a cleric. The great thing I like with a cleric, and especially if you're using a party that's pretty aggressive and pretty smart, is there is an item called Warding Bond. Warding Bond is a great 2nd level spell. What it basically does is it gives one character, is a concentration spell, so it has some setbacks. But you find someone in your party who has a really high armor class. A lot of the fighter classes have some great feats, or characters just build these big tanky tank fighters that have high levels of armor class. You throw Warding Bond on them. That gives them damage resistant everything, which means they take half damage from anything. Sword, piercing, doesn't matter, monster bite, fireball, makes no difference. Whatever you hit them with, they're taking half damage. The catch is you take the other half. You're splitting the damage between you and the opponent. Now, the problem is you have to then make your save to keep from losing your spell because of the concentration check. But if they're really tanky, they're not going to get hit that often. When they do, they take half damage. Your damage coming to you is not going to be that high, so you have a pretty good chance of making your concentration check, and it's a real party saver. And the other thing about it is, you're a second level fighter, and you have healing, and you have some other magical abilities, turn undead, the usual good stuff. It's a good character. Now, I tend not to play it in my group games a lot. The big advantage is Dave Miles, for some reason, always comes, and he always runs the Cleric, so I get a big sigh of relief, and I get to run something fun that I like to do. The other character I have in Adventure League that I really, really like, and it's kind of abusive. Boy, did I say I wasn't abusive? This is Parsnip. Parsnip is currently a first-level barbarian, third-level rogue, arcane trickster. This is a devastatingly good character. He has Rage 2, and with his barbarian ability to use his Constitution added on to his already high dexterity for AC, he runs naked. He can still carry a shield, but that makes what I basically have as a fourth-level character with no magic, running essentially butt naked, a 16 armor class, 18 with his shield, which is really great. And I can rage, which means I take half damage from normal weapons. This is a great character to run amongst a group you don't know. Often you'll find they've got a lot of wizards, they have a lot of multi-level, multi-type characters. I tend to believe that I think Sorcerer was in every character everybody ran. It's a nasty little character. He's going to have good hit points. He's a rogue. He's got backstab. He does good damage. He's using finesse weapons, so he's got a really nice to hit. He's great. And at third level, he gets the rogue ability, which means that a slow character now is an incredibly fast character, because as a bonus action, you can take a free dash. You can also disengage as a free on it, or you can attempt to hide. All of these are great for a rogue. Now, normally he runs kind of as a semi-tank or secondary fighter, but it's great. He does all the rogue stuff. He's got good acrobatics, you've got good sleight of hand, so you've got a decent perception you work on, so that hopefully he can find the traps, deal with the traps, do all the roguey things you want to have, hide in shadows, sneak, backstab, all that. But if he gets stuck in a fight, he's really good. These are fun characters, and if you're running a group, they're really good characters to have because they can fit in. I have a bard I ran in 4th edition, D&D. I liked it a lot. I had some fighters. I've enjoyed them a lot. In 3.5, I had a half-orc monk who was unstoppable. Mog was deadly. I'll have to sing the Mog song for you later. Now, for my own group, one of my things is I have a 7th level druid. I tend not to multi-class as much when I'm running in groups with players, because since they're going up, you try to want to utilize their special. The druid's a great class. He's the secondary healer, but he has a broken spell, which I think you've heard me talk about before. It is a 3rd level spell called Healing Spirit. And it's really nasty. And if you have not heard about it, you can, I'm sure, check online. There'll be a lot of people telling you how this spell is truly broken. That's an interesting character that I'm running, because in the campaign that Mark has us in, my character was a wizard. And Dave Miles had a fighter, and then there was, a rogue and the usual suspects in the group. My wizard got way overpowered, picked up some incredibly nasty combination magical items, had a robe of the Archmage, and a staff of fire. horrible combination because their saving throw was like you had to make a 19 saving throw versus a fireball. It was going to be really hard. I trashed a lot of things. And it really wasn't my character being that nasty, because as I've said to people, there's never a problem with having your characters super powerful. There's never a problem with having them even super weak. The problem comes when you don't have parity, when one player or two players, in the case of Dave Miles and I, Dave Miles had this unstoppable fighter, I had the unstoppable wizard. The other characters in our party were good, but they just didn't match up to us. So anything that was going to challenge Dave and I, we're going to maybe kill these characters. Anything that was sort of, running at the level of the other characters, we'd broom away Dave and I like it wasn't even there. And the other players began to think that, why are we even playing? We've got you two. So what I did is I dumped my wizard, made him a non-player character for the game master to use, and took on this NPC who was with our party as sort of a secondary character. But I liked him, and I wanted to write a druid. Mark did a little twist with him, because I had lost a Staff of the Woodlands early on with him, and I had actually rolled the 20 and had it lose its magical ability. So I made this big thing that he came back to the magic mystical forest to bury this staff and in the elven woods and try to get it to come back, sort of like the Groot comeback in Guardians of the Galaxy, which I really liked. And that way I could dump the character, which really was the thing. I didn't need the druid anymore. We had a nice healer. We didn't, we didn't need the NPC. So it was a great way to get rid of him. But now, since I was getting rid of my wizard, I said, hey, I'll just run the NPC. And Mark gave me back the staff as a little Groody type thing, but it has extra powers, and it's all really good. It's fun, and I think it's a good character to run. The other character I'm currently running in Craig's campaign is a very nasty character, and if you have not looked at it yet, it is the Bard. Duelist class. It's really nasty. He has good magic. He's a minor healer. Some of his magic is really effective. Not so much as the Druid, maybe even so much as the Cleric. But having a secondary healer is good. Having some character that throws some good spells, plus the high Bard charisma for negotiations, dealing with NPCs, is really incredible. And the Duelist makes this guy a really nasty fighter. He can use his inspirations to add to his combat ability, and they're varying different types that they have, but one of them allows him to roll his inspiration on in my case because of his D8 level, on a D8, adds to the damage, and also adds to his armor class. Also at his level, he makes 2 attacks, one of the few characters that can make 2 attacks other than a fighter. This makes this guy really, really nasty. He has a finesse weapon. He has a spectacular dexterity. It's a tough character. He's a fun character. So you've got a fighter if we need a fighter, a healer if you need a healer, a magic user if you need a magic user. The only problem with him I'm having is, since I like to try to step back when I'm not GMing and not be the focal point, it's a little hard with a noble bard who has great negotiation skills. So I find myself, it's like, hey, you get up there and negotiate with the NPCs, which, I kind of like to not do. But this character, at this point right now, Vonlin is more than likely my favorite character I'm playing in 5th edition D&D. I miss 4th edition. In 4th edition, there was a thing called a pacifist cleric. Horrendously horrible. Matt used to ask me not to bring him. He was just too tough. I mean, a party with it was very tough to beat. And when I ran my second rendition of Albion a few months back, I guess maybe a year ago now, where it was more advanced with the invasion of the Romans, Mark came in and ran a pacifist cleric. And I smiled. I said, thank you very much, Mark. You've made my day, because that allowed me to step up the challenge level of the adventures, because I know how good a pacifist cleric is, and he can really keep the battles going. So I felt that the gloves could come off. I could run substantially nasty adventures. And he did exactly what I thought. It just was a constant escalatio of his skill versus the fact that my monsters could be nastier, and it made for a really good adventure. 4th edition I really love. And the reason I like 4th edition is a lot of the same reason that I love the Fantasy Trip, as you've heard about, and this game, which you might have seen if you watched any of my Twitters. Don Hawthorne has dragged out his Greek historical Ancients campaign, which is fabulous. And I'm running a Spartan in Dragon Quest. Now, he is awesome. And you'll want to hear more about him as this goes down the road. But the reason I like Dragon Quest, the reason I like the Fantasy Trip, the reason I like Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition is really in those games, you start as a hero. In most of the other game, you're an up-and-comer. You're a squire, or you're some, guy trying to make a living. And in 5th edition, they let you go through first level very quickly. Very seldom does it seem that I ever run anybody through more than one first level adventure. And then it's on to 2nd level, and they're doing better at giving you a heroic element for all your characters. It's a little linear for me, and that's just the way it goes. 3.5 was kind of linear. 5th edition is 2, but there's a lot of solid options, so I think you can be happy finding a lot of ways to do it. And then I suppose you can always work with your game masters if you want to come in and do something differently. Now, Dragon Quest, I'm very fun having a character I just generated, my Spartan warrior. Now, Kelanites is great. If you're not familiar with Dragon Quest, your characters are going to be about as good when you start playing them as they are after you've played them a year. They advance in their abilities. They become more finesse. They can do a lot more things. Now, I rolled a really excellent roll. You roll a bunch of D5s, half a D10, and you come up with a number between 4 and 20. And I rolled an 18, which meant I cannot have a high statistic. All my statistics have to be at a good level. Imagine if it was, say, like a 14. But I have a lot of stats points, so which basically means I can have all 14s to make a D&D reference, even though that's not what it is. But because I'm running a Spartan, Don has made up all these extra rules that add to all these other statistics that he already starts with some higher classes of fighting abilities and alike. To make one long story short, this guy is deadly in the extreme. Great armor stops hits because Dragon Quest and the Fantasy Trip do something that I really, really like over D&D. And it was, if I have to be truthful, more than likely the biggest reason I left Dungeons & Dragons is I just did not like the idea that armor made you harder to hit and did not stop damage. It doesn't make as much of a difference to me now because as I've become older and wiser, I find it isn't that big of a deal. But when I was young and, desirous to see blood and guts, this was great. And characters are very killable. So it requires that you have good strategies with your games and the like. And you play very solid game because your hit points are not going to basically rise either in both Fantasy Trip and Dragon Quest. I have a high level of hit points with this fighter, relatively speaking. In 20 games, he may not have more than 2 hit points, more than 3 hit points, or more than he has now. So the game is heroic from the very get-go. And he is nasty. He's truly nasty right now. I can go on talking about all kinds of games. We could get into chivalry and sorcery, where I could tell you basically run a knight or a high elf, or you don't bother. RuneQuest, I loved, but nobody would go into the idea that the gods controlled your destiny, and thusly you had to join a cult to become powerful. There's so many great games out there, and I think if you're interested in seeing something other than Dungeons & Dragons, and you want to see something very, very different, I would say the Fantasy Trip would be a good one. I'd really say Dragon Quest would be a good one. Dragon Quest you're going to more likely have to find on eBay. This is a 2nd edition Dragon Quest, which means 1981. Now, hard to find a lot of copies. The good news is, if you find them, they're more than likely pretty cheap, because most people don't play, don't care, so you can maybe grab a copy. It's a fun game. The magic system is very difficult, hard to learn. It's going to require somebody with some dedication. DMing, it's not that bad. It's okay. It's going to be no different, I think, difficult than Dungeons & Dragons. You have your multiple statistics and everything else, and monsters can be pretty tough. Fantasy Trip would be good for the same reason. You start out pretty strong, you will advance, but the game is very easy to run. It takes a lot less time to get up with the game, a lot less time to learn the rules, and in this case, Steve Jackson's about to Kickstarter re-release his game. Now, from my understanding, they're going to release the game straight. Haven't heard for certain, but that's what I understand. So what I would say, if you're interested in that, go online and download all the fandom amendments to the Fantasy Trip. A lot of them are really good, and you can decide then later if you're going to want to use them or not. I'm hoping that he would just put them in a booklet and then put them out there. But a friend of mine who's an attorney says there's a lot of legal ramifications of that, and maybe it's hard to do. Anyway, I want to do this, and it's running much longer than I thought I was going to run. But I have a great passion for running characters. I love them. In all different games, I want to run different characters. I had a character, a halfling dagger duelist in Matt Coville's game called Pinecone. Oh my God, he was nasty. He was so nasty that Matt and everybody thought I was cheating. And they had to go look through the rules, and it's like, well, okay, that's what he does. I mean, because almost every time somebody would attack me, he'd repost. And he was hard to hit, and all the things that you have with a little roguish dagger, halfling, type thing. So enjoy your games, and what I tell you is find something you want to run, get together with your party members and say, hey, is anybody else running a bard? Do you mind if I run one? And if they say, oh yeah, I'm running one, it's like, hey, anybody want to run a druid? Find something that isn't necessarily the front show man. If you're going to run a fighter, stoic is great. If you want to really jump in there and run and lead the party, well, go to it. But a lot of times it's fun to watch the stories develop. And I think, as you've heard from me, my idea is to always find ways to push the story forward, to help the DM, say, look, my character's really awesome. Oh, except I've got this one glaring flaw. And if you want to take advantage of it and abuse me with it, there you go. Craig's done really good at that. I've got a noble. It's a Romeo and Juliet story. The city-state that's trying to destroy the one that we're in. Well, that happens to be the girl that I betrothed to, and we're having this relationship trying to figure out how we're going to get together without our families killing each other and all the world coming to an end. Now, Craig hasn't used it a lot, but it's always great. He keeps throwing me into situations because of my nobility, that we get dragged to events that, go wrong, and that's great. And all of that helps the game master. So you want to do that. You want to be one pushing the story forward, because if you guys watch Critical Role, the one thing you can almost always note is that Matt Mercer is really sharp about taking people's backstories and putting them into the main story. And the characters then become much more involved in wanting to push that story forward. And Matt's working on that too. I try to do it. I think most good game masters try to do that. But that's what you want to do. You want to build characters that the game master can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to utilize that. I'm going to kind of stick you in a position that might not be in your best interest, but it's going to be beneficial for driving the story forward. So you become a PC NPC, or there's some direct involvement that he can put you in situations that don't seem contrived. The reality, the belief that it's a real event can take place. So anyway, I just wanted to go over this with you. I thought it was going to be short, turned out not to be, but I hope you get some understanding of what I look at as character generation, and maybe this will help you in your own generation of characters. But remember, it's your character, have fun, and make a good one, and make the game fun for everybody. So until I get a chance to talk to you again, and my brain kind of recoagulates after this tremendous heat, fight me, devils, fight, for I hate peace. Game on, and keep cool.